California, August 1987. Morning heat presses down like a physical weight, flattening sound, dulling movement. The cemetery looks staged, almost too composed. Trimmed grass, pale stone, controlled distance between people. Cameras stay back. Not out of respect, not entirely. More like an unspoken contract. Not today, not like this. Dean Martin stands slightly apart from the center of the gathering. Not hidden, but not where eyes naturally go. A dark suit, immaculate. Dark sunglasses that reveal nothing. His posture is straight, practiced. The kind that doesn't come from confidence, but from decades of knowing how to hold yourself when the world is watching and you don't want it to know anything. There are no tears. Not because there is no grief, but because grief, at this depth, doesn't move the way people expect. It sits low in the body, heavy, quiet, almost still. The coffin is closed. The air smells faintly of dry earth and flowers that arrived too early this morning. Someone coughs and immediately regrets it. Shoes shift against gravel. A breeze moves through the trees, just enough to stir jackets and hair. Not enough to cool anything. Dean's hands are clasped in front of him. His fingers are locked tighter than necessary. If someone were close enough to notice, they might see the faint tremor running through his knuckles, the slight tension at the corner of his jaw. But no one is that close. No one dares to be. And then, from behind his right shoulder, close enough that the breath touches skin, a voice. Not loud. Not meant for anyone else. He had it coming. The words don't echo. They don't need to. They land directly, cleanly, with surgical precision. For a moment, Dean doesn't react at all. His chest tightens, not sharply, but all at once, as if the air has thickened. His breath pauses halfway in. His body registers the sentence before his mind allows it meaning. Time stretches, not dramatically, not cinematically, just enough to feel wrong. 2 seconds, maybe 3. An eternity measured in restraint. He does not turn around. That, more than anything, is deliberate. Around him, the world continues in fragments. Someone shifts weight. A hand squeezes another hand. Somewhere farther back, a camera lens adjusts, searching for something, anything, that can be interpreted later. Dean knows where he is. He knows exactly who is standing nearby. Producers, studio executives, old acquaintances whose condolences were carefully rehearsed, journalists pretending to be mourners, people who understand, instinctively, that a reaction right now would be valuable. He also knows something else. This is not an insult aimed at an entertainer. This is not gossip overheard at a party. This is not cruelty disguised as opinion. This is a verdict passed on a son, on his son, delivered on the one day when even the cruel are expected to pretend they understand. Limits. Dean's fingers tighten further, nails pressing into skin. His jaw sets, just enough to ache. He forces his breathing back into rhythm, slow and controlled. The way he learned years ago when anger could cost contracts, friendships, entire careers. He still does not turn, because whoever said it wanted exactly that. A flare, a spectacle, a story to be told later as proof. Proof that even now, even here, Dean Martin couldn't keep himself in check. Behind the sunglasses, his eyes lower, not in weakness, but in calculation. He becomes acutely aware of the silence around him, of how many people are suddenly listening without appearing to listen, of how fragile this moment is. The coffin stands between him and the ground that will soon close over it. The sentence lingers, suspended in the heat, unanswered. And in that space, between what was said and what has not yet happened, something irreversible begins to take shape. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The sentence doesn't belong to this morning alone. It comes from much further back. Hollywood learned long ago how to survive tragedy without carrying it. By the early 1960s, grief had already become a managed risk, something to be framed, softened, or quietly redirected. Studios didn't deny pain, they reshaped it. Public sorrow was acceptable as long as it didn't interrupt the machinery. Dean Martin understood that system better than most. He had lived inside it when it was still polite, before it learned how to be efficient. His son grew up in that shadow. Dino Paul Martin Jr. was never just a name on a birth certificate. From the beginning, he was described in relation to something else: potential, inheritance, expectation. The industry watched him before it knew him. Every step forward invited comparison, every misstep confirmed suspicion. Being talented wasn't enough. Being disciplined wasn't enough. Being careful was interpreted as weakness. The headlines followed a familiar rhythm. Dean Martin's son takes to the skies. The heir refuses to live quietly. Hollywood's golden boy flirts with danger. They never sounded hostile. That was the trick. The tone was observational, almost curious, as if fate itself were being documented in advance. Editors understood how to imply inevitability without stating it. A raised eyebrow could do more damage than an accusation. Dino became a pilot not because it was reckless, but because it was precise, controlled, demanding. In the air, mistakes were immediate and honest. There were no rumors at altitude, no whispers, just skill or failure. But precision doesn't survive translation into gossip. Every success was reframed as defiance. Every risk was exaggerated into a pattern. And quietly, without announcement, a narrative formed, one that suggested that whatever might happen one day would not be a surprise. Dean saw it happening in real time. Agents stopped correcting reporters. Studio publicists chose silence over resistance. Silence was safer. Silence didn't provoke. Silence didn't force anyone powerful to take a side. In this world, the truth didn't belong to those who lived it. It belonged to those who printed first. Dean had learned, painfully, that outrage rarely changed outcomes. What mattered was composure. The industry respected restraint, not because it was noble, but because it was convenient. A man who didn't react could be managed. A man who exploded became a problem. So he swallowed things, again and again. He learned to read between headlines, to hear what was being suggested without being said. He understood that once a story hardened, no correction would ever fully erase it. By the time the crash happened, there was already language waiting. Tragic, unfortunate, sad, but not unexpected. No one said deserved. No one needed to. That is how the rules worked. Responsibility was never assigned directly. It was implied, distributed, allowed to settle into public memory without fingerprints. And anyone who challenged that version of events was accused of emotion, of denial, of refusing reality. Standing at the cemetery decades later, Dean knows this is what presses in from all sides. Not just grief, but history. A long accumulation of looks, pauses, articles never fully retracted. He knows the system will not defend him today. It never does. It only observes. And somewhere inside that quiet machinery, someone has decided that the sentence whispered behind his shoulder is merely an honest conclusion. Something everyone already knows. Something no one is brave enough to say aloud. Except today, someone did. The man does not leave. That becomes clear almost immediately. Dean feels the continued presence before he confirms it with his senses. A weight in the air behind him, a stillness that refuses to dissolve. Whoever spoke knows exactly where to stand, close enough to be felt, far enough to avoid attention. It is the posture of someone accustomed to moving through rooms without consequence. The service continues in fragments. A voice begins to speak at the front, steady, respectful, carefully measured. Words about loss, about legacy. They pass through Dean without landing. His awareness narrows to a tight radius. The heat on his neck, the fabric of his jacket against his shoulders, the slow, deliberate pace of his breathing. Then, again, the voice. Lower this time. Almost conversational, as if correcting a misunderstanding. People knew. No emphasis, no cruelty in the tone. Just a statement, delivered with the confidence of someone who believes consensus is protection. Dean's fingers tighten once more, then stop. He does not move his hands. He does not turn his head. He allows the sentence to exist without acknowledgement, and in doing so, he feels the irritation it creates, not in himself, but in the man behind him. Silence, when expected to break, becomes a provocation. Around them, something subtle shifts. A man 2 rows away glances sideways, then looks down. Another nods faintly, not in agreement, but in recognition of the idea. It is not support. It is familiarity. The kind that comes from having heard the same story, repeated often enough to stop questioning it. This is how pressure works here. Not through confrontation, but through suggestion. Through the implication that resistance would be strange, unnecessary, even embarrassing. Dean understands the trap instantly. If he reacts, it becomes a headline. Grieven father lashes out. If he stays silent, the phrase takes root, unchallenged. Both outcomes serve someone else. The air grows thicker, as if the space itself is closing. Jackets brush. The distance between bodies shortens. Not aggressively, politely. Claustrophobia disguised as etiquette. Dean keeps his gaze forward. The coffin anchors his vision. It gives him something solid, something unarguable. His breathing remains slow, controlled. But beneath that control, something sharp begins to form. Not rage, not grief, but clarity. This is no longer about a whispered opinion. It is about permission. Permission to decide what this death means. Permission to assign cause without responsibility. Permission to let implication replace truth. And the longer he stands without responding, the more confident the presence behind him becomes. The man shifts slightly closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to test. Dean feels it then. The precise moment when silence stops being restraint and starts becoming surrender. He knows this world. He knows how quickly unchallenged words harden into fact. How easily a quiet consensus can erase nuance, complexity, humanity. He has seen careers bent by it, reputations reduced to a single convenient sentence. His jaw tightens, then releases. For the first time since the service began, his attention shifts fully inward. Not toward memory, not toward pain, but toward decision. He does not ask himself what the safest response would be. He asks a different question entirely. What would it mean to do nothing? The answer arrives without drama. It would mean allowing this moment, this place, to be claimed by something false. It would mean letting his son be summarized by someone else's convenience. It would mean accepting that even here, even now, the rules of the game remain untouched. Dean exhales slowly. The service continues. The voice at the front pauses. A breeze moves through the trees again, stirring leaves, lifting the edge of a program from the ground. Behind him, the man waits. One more sentence, Dean knows, and something will change. Not loudly, not violently, but permanently. Nothing visible happens. That is what makes the moment dangerous. Dean remains where he is, shoulders square, feet planted with the same quiet precision he once used before stepping onto a stage. From the outside, it could be mistaken for indifference. Those who have known him longest would recognize it for what it is instead. Control pushed to its absolute limit. Slowly, deliberately, he lifts a hand and removes his sunglasses. The gesture is unhurried, almost ceremonial. The lenses catch the light for a brief second before disappearing into his palm. His eyes, finally exposed, do not search for the man behind him. They move forward, settling on the coffin with an intensity that silences everything else. For the first time since the whispered sentence, his face changes. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could easily describe later, but something in his expression hardens. Not with anger, but with resolve. The muscles around his eyes tighten. His jaw sets into a line that does not tremble. Inside him, memory does not arrive as images. It comes as weight. Years of restraint. Years of smiling through rooms where loyalty was conditional. Years of protecting others by saying nothing. He remembers every time he chose quiet over confrontation because it seemed wiser, cleaner, more professional. He remembers what that silence cost. This is not the first boundary he has felt crossed, but it is the first time the cost of ignoring it feels unbearable. He looks at the coffin again, not sentimentally, not theatrically. He looks at it as a fact, something final, something that no longer needs protecting, but still demands truth. In that stillness, he understands something with absolute clarity. This moment does not belong to the industry. It does not belong to the people watching. It does not even belong to his public image. It belongs to him as a father. The realization sharpens his focus. Fear shifts direction. It is no longer his to manage. He finally turns. Not abruptly. Not aggressively. Just enough. The man behind him meets his gaze and freezes. The casual confidence drains first, followed by the faint assurance that anonymity provides. What replaces it is uncertainty, not panic, but the dawning awareness of miscalculation. Dean does not speak. He doesn't need to. His eyes hold steady, calm in a way that is profoundly unsettling. There is no accusation in them, no threat, only recognition, as if the man has been seen clearly for the first time, stripped of crowd and cover. In that instant, the roles invert. The speaker becomes the subject. The observer becomes exposed. Dean feels the urge to speak rise, sharp, instinctive, and he reins it in. Words, when chosen poorly, are gifts to those who misuse them. He will not offer excess. He will not perform. Whatever he does next will be precise, measured, irreversible. He knows now that silence was never the absence of strength. It was preparation. And the calm he feels is not peace. It is alignment, a convergence between grief and purpose that leaves no room for hesitation. Around them, people sense the shift without understanding it. Conversations falter, movements slow. A few instinctively step back, as if proximity itself has become risky. Dean remains still, fully present. He is no longer managing perception. He is no longer protecting a system. He is standing exactly where he needs to stand. And for the first time that morning, he knows that whatever comes next will not belong to rumor, interpretation, or control. It will belong to him. Dean steps closer, not into the man's space, just enough to remove distance as protection. The movement is subtle, almost courteous. No sudden shifts, no signals for an audience. If someone blinked at the wrong moment, they might miss it entirely. He stops at a distance that forces attention. Their eyes meet again, and this time, there is nowhere for the man to place his gaze that doesn't feel like retreat. The confidence he carried moments ago has nowhere to anchor. He is no longer surrounded by implication. He is alone with the consequence of what he chose to say. Dean speaks. His voice is low, controlled, nearly private. Not pitched for drama, not shaped for memory. Just loud enough that the air between them carries it, and just quiet enough that only a handful of people nearby will ever be able to say, truthfully, that they heard every word. What he says does not resemble an argument. There is no correction of facts, no defense of reputation, no attempt to persuade. He does not raise his voice. He does not lower it further for effect. He delivers a simple alignment of responsibility, placing the weight of meaning back where it belongs, removing every excuse the man has been hiding behind. The sentence is short. It does not accuse. It does not threaten. It does not explain. It does something far more uncomfortable. It makes the words spoken earlier belong fully to the man who said them. The effect is immediate. The man's expression shifts in stages. Confusion first, then a tightening around the mouth, then a subtle but unmistakable retreat inward. His shoulders draw back, as if bracing against something unseen. For a split second, his eyes flick sideways, searching for support that no longer exists. None comes. The space around them changes. Sound thins. Conversations nearby stall mid-breath. A woman a few steps away looks down at the ground, suddenly absorbed by nothing in particular. Someone else takes a half-step back. Instinctive, unplanned. No one interrupts. The man opens his mouth as if to respond, then stops. Whatever he intended to say does not survive the moment. Any explanation would only make things worse. Any defense would confirm exactly what has just been exposed. Dean does not wait for a reply. He doesn't need one. He holds the man's gaze for one final second, not to intimidate, but to finish the exchange. And then he steps back, returning to his original position with the same composure he never lost. The silence that follows is heavier than anything spoken. It presses down, not violently, but decisively. The kind of silence that forces people to examine their own proximity to a moment they did not intend to witness, but will not forget. The man lowers his eyes. He does not speak again. Whatever mask he arrived with, observer, commentator, participant in consensus, it no longer fits. He shifts once, then again, then finally moves away, not hurried, not dramatic, but unmistakably diminished. When he disappears into the arrangement of mourners, it is without acknowledgement, without recognition. No one follows him. Dean remains still. Nothing has been won. Nothing has been celebrated. But something has been settled. The sentence that should never have been spoken has been answered. Not with force, not with volume, but with a clarity that leaves no room for reinterpretation. And the cemetery, for the first time that morning, feels exactly as quiet as it should have been all along. The silence does not break. No one fills it with words, applause, or relief. It lingers, suspended, carrying more meaning than any reaction could. The cemetery feels altered, not quieter, but more exposed, as if something private has been acknowledged in public, and everyone present understands they are not entitled to comment on it. People adjust their posture without realizing why. Shoulders square, hands unclench. Several faces turn away at once, not out of disinterest, but restraint. This is not a moment to be consumed. The man who spoke earlier is gone from Dean's immediate orbit. Not dramatically removed, not escorted. He simply no longer occupies space. Those who noticed his presence before now register his absence without discussion. No one tracks where he goes. No one asks. That, too, is part of the response. A few figures remain closer to Dean than they were moments ago. Not close enough to intrude. Close enough to signal something unspoken. A producer who has known him for decades pauses beside a headstone and stays there, eyes forward. A musician, older now, shifts his stance so that his body subtly blocks the view from behind. No words pass between them. None are necessary. This is how respect moves in this world. Quietly, without declaration. At the edge of the gathering, journalists lower their cameras. Not all of them, just enough to change the temperature. Lenses tilt away from Dean, settle instead on the arrangement of flowers, the line of cars, the sky. Later, when the stories appear, the language will be careful, almost sterile. Private ceremony. Restrained farewell. Martin remained composed. The sentence will not be printed, not because it wasn't heard, but because something about the moment made it unusable. The industry understands when a boundary has been drawn. It may test it later, but not immediately. Not when witnesses are still carrying the weight of what they saw. What follows is not support. It is acknowledgement. The service resumes its intended rhythm. Words about remembrance return, softer now, less performative. People listen differently, less like spectators, more like participants in something they didn't anticipate, but will respect. Dean does not look around to measure the shift. He feels it in the way the air has changed, in the absence of pressure behind his shoulders, in the fact that nothing more is being asked of him. He has not been forgiven. He has not been praised. He has been understood. That understanding is quiet, incomplete, and temporary, but it is real. When the service ends, people disperse in small, careful movements. No one rushes him. No one tries to extract meaning. A few nods are exchanged. A few hands touch his arm briefly, without urgency. The industry does not apologize. It never does. Instead, it steps back. And for the first time since the morning began, Dean is allowed to stand where he is without interpretation, without expectation, without being turned into something useful for someone else's narrative. The silence holds, not empty, not awkward, but settled. As if everyone present has agreed, without discussion, that there are moments even this system is not meant to absorb, and this was one of them. Weeks pass without a marked calendar, no televised recap, no carefully edited segment, no talk show monologue that turns grief into a story with a punchline. The moment at the cemetery doesn't become a clip, because no one captured it cleanly enough to own it. It survives the way certain things survive in Hollywood, not as content, but as caution. In private rooms, in studio hallways, in quiet corners of restaurants where the lighting flatters and the tables are spaced for secrecy, people mention it without leaning too hard on the details. They don't repeat the stranger's sentence. Most claim they never heard it. A few admit they did, but only after lowering their voice. What they remember, and what travels, is the shift that followed. The sudden, unnatural stillness. The way the air tightened. The way Dean's calm became something no one wanted to challenge. The story changes shape as it moves. One person says Dean didn't raise his voice. Another swears he barely spoke at all. Someone else describes it as the coldest thing I ever witnessed, then stops, as if that description risks disrespect. But the conclusion remains consistent. He did not make it a spectacle. That is what surprises them most. For decades, Dean Martin had been treated like a symbol people could simplify. The smooth singer, the effortless charm, the man behind the glass of a drink and a joke. Even friends sometimes mistook the surface for the whole. After the funeral, that version of him begins to feel insufficient. A producer who once bragged about controlling narratives is heard saying, quietly, he reminded everyone who the hell he really was. Not admiration, exactly. Something closer to recognition. As if the industry briefly confronted a truth it prefers not to face. There are limits that money, influence, and familiarity cannot purchase. The press follows the usual path at first. Articles appear, respectful but distant. They describe heat, crowd size, names of attendees. They list achievements. They call it tragic. They keep it clean. And yet, something changes in the tone around the edges. In the weeks that follow, conversations about Dino's life become less eager to reduce him. A few people who once fed the inevitable narrative stop repeating it. Not because they suddenly discovered morality, but because the cost of saying it out loud has been reintroduced. Dean does not participate in any of it. No statements, no interviews, no carefully composed grief for public consumption. When people reach out, he responds in the way he always has. Minimal words, direct, human. He doesn't revisit the cemetery scene in stories. He doesn't trade on it to reshape his image. He lets the moment remain where it happened, as if moving it elsewhere would cheapen it. That refusal becomes part of its power. It is not a victory, and it is not satisfying in the way audiences are trained to expect. There is no applause at the end of it, no triumphant music, no clean moral delivered for comfort. There is only a boundary held. One late afternoon, long after the condolence calls slow, the cemetery is empty again. The flowers have begun to fade. The ground has settled into its new shape. Wind slides through the trees, lifting dry leaves and letting them fall without direction. No witnesses remain, no cameras, no whispered commentary, just the simple fact of a father's grief, and the quiet decision he made not to let cruelty become the final word. In the end, that is what lingers. Not a confrontation, not a quote, a kind of restrained anger that never asked to be admired, only to be respected. And in the silence after it, there is a feeling that cannot be packaged, that sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to perform at all.